All right, let's talk about modeling the standard. We've got establishing it, communicating it. There's some resources that we've identified. How do we go about modeling it? This is where leadership comes into play. And we use a dynamic here called the dynamic of authority, and essentially goes to the very core of what this badge represents. What is it that this badge stands for? Well, we can list them. It stands for the law. It represents government. It represents authority. It represents the Constitution. It represents the organization. It represents the standards of the police profession. It represents you as a sheriff or police chief or an administrator, leader within the organization. It represents the policies. It represents the procedures. And ultimately, it represents the trust that has been placed in each of us and each of our deputies by the people that we represent. That is what I mean by being a man or a woman under authority. Regretfully, however, many of our officers, sometimes sheriffs, have stepped out from under authority. They say, I don't need you telling me what to do. I don't need you telling me how to live my life or how to do my job. I'm in this for me. And we see an attitude that begins to develop, a prideful, arrogant, ego-centered, selfish attitude. It's all about me. It's not about this badge. What I want, my desires, my objectives, my agenda is more important to me than what this badge stands for and represents. And when we see officers take that step out from under authority, there's an attitude that develops. We call these walls of hostility. These walls of hostility begin to separate this officer from his or her authorities, leaders within their life, principles within their life. And out of this attitude, we're going to see a series of predictable patterns of behavior. And here's just a partial list. It's arrogant, cocky attitude, misconduct in office, abuse of force, abuse of authority, legitimate complaints, lawsuits, corruption, moral decay, divorce. We have the highest divorce rate of any profession, law enforcement in America today. We have one of the highest domestic violence rates of any profession. We have the highest alcoholism rate of any profession. And in the end, it leads to death. And what do we also lead the nation in right here? Suicides. Number one, as a profession, something's wrong with that number. You know that 2 to 4 times as many of our officers will take their own lives this year as will be killed at the hands of a felon? 2 to 4 times. There's something wrong with that number, folks. I've been doing a little informal survey as we travel around doing this training across America. I'm going to try it and see how it works here with you sheriffs real quickly. How many of you, as sheriffs leaders within your organization, have had an officer, but we'll try it 2 ways, have had an officer that's worked under your command that has been killed feloniously in the line of duty? I don't mean traffic accidents. I mean killed by a criminal. How many of y'all have had that? Let me see a show of hands, please. Okay, just a very small handful. That's good. How many of you have had an officer take their own life? Let me see a show of hands. At least twice the number went up. 2 to 4 times is the statistic that they told us. It just held true right here in this room. Something's bad wrong with this. There's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. This is a path of destruction that many of our officers find themselves on. We have a name for this officer. We call him or her the Renegade. That's a great name for a Jeep. That is a bad name to describe one of our officers. Arrogant, cocky, operating out from under authority, taking things personally. This is really one of the key aspects here. They tend to take conflicts, problems, personally rather than taking them professionally. They take them personally, and then they take their anger out on the individuals that they're dealing with. I happened to have the opportunity to have a discussion with our governor in our state just a few weeks ago. We've been having a crisis. Not only did this Tarnished Badge series come out about, a year or 2 ago, but now we've got a whole other controversy going on in our state with our highway patrol. Apparently there were a number of dash cam videos that came out in this investigation that showed some of our troopers being rather abusive with some of our citizens in various situations. It caused a major crisis. Our DPS director, his contract was not renewed as a result of this. Big controversy going on. And I had this conversation with the governor, and I said, let me tell you, there's a common denominator. There is a common denominator in every one of these videos, and it's simply this. A trooper was confronted with an individual that resisted his, because all these were males, I think, his authority. The trooper took it personally, and if they could catch the person, they took it out on them physically, and if they couldn't catch him, they called him a bad name while they were chasing after him. And it's on the video, and it's on the news. It's a common denominator. It's the officers operating out from under authority. What we want to see are more of these faithful officers, the officers that are acting in harmony with the principles of their authorities, accurately and faithfully representing all of the authorities that are embodied with this badge. Now, I got to tell you a quick story about one of my deputies. It's occurred a few years ago. Because it goes back to this. It goes back to the classic challenge. The classic challenge to a law enforcement officer. And you've all heard this before. The classic challenge goes something like this. You wouldn't be so tough if you take off what? That badge that you're wearing. How many of you have heard that before on the streets dealing with some criminal or inside the detention facility? Well, one of my deputies was confronted with a group of inmates that issued that challenge. You wouldn't be so tough. You took that badge off. You know, a lot of officers, regretfully, will figuratively take that badge off, step out from under authority, take it personally, take it out on the individual that's challenged them. Some officers have actually literally taken the badge off. I got a complaint from the inmates. The inmates said, and it worked its way up the chain of command to my desk, the inmates said that they issued the challenge to the deputy, that the deputy took his badge off and went over to where they were and engaged in some thump therapy. That was the complaint. Made its way to my desk. I saw that and I said, ain't no way. Not one of my deputies. We teach them this stuff, you know, they're tired of hearing it. It's not one of my guys. I'm sure this is just one of these complaints these inmates came up with. You know how they do. I know we got to investigate it, but I'm sure that's frivolous. Well, we investigated it. Come to find out, guess what? The deputy took his badge off and thumped up on one of the inmates. You know, we interviewed the inmate during our investigation. You know what the inmate said? The inmate said, we're inmates. We're supposed to act this way. He said, he is an officer of the law, and he is supposed to be held to a higher standard. Do you know that my inmate understood this principle better than my deputy did? Then we get around to interviewing the deputy. You know what he says? He says, I don't understand what the big... He confessed. He said, I don't understand what the big deal is. It's just a piece of metal. Talking about his badge. He said, I don't understand what it's just a piece of metal. You know, I thought about what he said, you know, after I fired him. And, you know, actually he's right. If you think about it for a minute. He's actually right. This badge is just a piece of metal. But it's not what the badge is that's important to us. It's what the badge what? Stands for. What does that badge represent? That's the standard that we're after here in this training. So with that, I'm going to turn you back to Franklin on recognizing the standard.